Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to another edition of the WGSN-DB Going Solo Veterans um, Corner. I am your host, retired Army First Sergeant Paul Holbert, coming to you live from Northern Virginia. And for those of you that have watched the show before, um, you know that our show is designed to highlight stories of veterans from around the country, their service, their stories, what they're doing now. And also, we bring on some veteran service organizations to share their programs and their information with our veterans, our military folks, and their families. So we want to thank you for tuning in and joining us this evening. Before I get started with tonight's discussion, which of course will be after the uniform part two, we'll get into that in just a minute. But I wanted to take a moment again to thank our sponsors, as I do at the beginning of each show, because these sponsors are so important to us and they're so helpful. And of course, we have Quest Jewelers from Merrifield, Virginia, Quest Pete and Juan Tane, the owners of Quest Jewelers. Folks, I talk about this every week. They have some of the most quality jewelry and jewelry accessories you will find. So we encourage you. I encourage you, go to their website, questjewelers.com, and see what Pete has to offer there. And if you tell him that you watched the show and I sent you, he will hook you up and provide you a discount as well. So if you go there, you place an order, you call him, tell Pete that you watched our show and you want to see what he has, and tell him you're there for the discount, and he will hook you up. I have had a number of things that we have purchased. I have purchased personally there, and I'll tell you, they are quality pieces. And you guys out there don't. My wife doesn't always watch this show, but so don't tell her. I actually have Pete making a new custom piece for her for the holidays this year. So call him up, ask him what he's got, ask him what he can do, and he will take care of you. I also want to thank our other sponsor, Nationwide IT, NIS. Nationwide IT is a service-disabled veteran-owned small business owned by retired Army Warrant Officer C.K. Park. He and his wife have the business in Fairfax, Virginia. And I got to tell you, they are a professional organization as far as business is concerned. Whether you're in need for your organization of help with surveys, professional management services, IT security, training, program development, whatever you need, he has the staff that can help you do it. And I also wanted to give them a shout out this week because I recently found out that Nationwide IT and CK's company is actually going to receive a platinum medallion from the Hiring Vets organization. And it is an organization in the United States that recognizes businesses who provide extraordinary support for veterans in hiring and other programs. And he was singled out for a 2022 platinum medallion this year. So I want to congratulate them. That and the fact that he employs approximately 40% of his entire workforce across the nation are veterans. So he really believes in supporting the veterans as he does supporting our show. And we want to thank him and his organization for that. All right. So kind of a long-winded plug for the sponsors, but I got to tell you, we are very thankful for them. We're very happy to have them, and we appreciate them very much. So I want to move into tonight's show. And for those of you who may have watched the last show, we moved to a new platform where we're going to continue to have veteran guests on some of the shows. But on some of the shows, I'm going to be here talking with you, sharing things, sharing information, and other things that will be important or could be important to veterans or service members and their families. So this is part two of the initial effort of that, Life After the Uniform. And for those of you that may have seen our last show, you'll probably remember that I spent some time talking about service in general, why people serve, what kind of drives them to join the military and serve the country, and then finally those factors that kind of drive that decision when they know it's time to say, you know what, I've done my part, I'm ready to go, or I'm just an old guy like me and it's time to retire. So we had a pretty good show, I think, about those topics. And as we make those decisions, to leave the service, and no matter what reason it is, like we discussed last week, whether it's just your time, you want to retire, maybe you were injured and had to leave the service, maybe you came into the service to get an education and now you're ready to get out and go to school. So whatever it is, you're still on that journey of trying to make that transition. And I have to tell you, one of the most difficult pieces of that transition that I saw while I was on active duty was once a soldier made that decision to leave the service, there were a couple of things that they really, really thought about. And one of the first things that a lot of the soldiers discussed with me was, here I'm in an organization, a professional organization. I've got a skill, I've got a job, but I also have a steady paycheck. Not saying that the military pays exuberantly, because for those of you that were in or are in now, that that's not the case, but you did have a steady paycheck. And for those of us, I remember when it came time for me to make that decision to say, yeah, I think it's time for me to retire. And of course, myself, I had an extra incentive. I had torn a knee and had to have surgery. So it kind of put a curtailment on some of my physical ability, the ability to keep up with my younger soldiers and things of that nature. So that kind of helped drive my decision. But I still could have stayed longer. But I made that decision and said it was time to go. And then that was one of the first things I started thinking about. Once it grabbed me, once I dropped those retirement papers in and I know they were in to be approved, I started thinking, my gosh, probably here in about, another 4 or 5 months, I'm going to be retired from the military. And you sure can't live off military retirement. Most people can't. So the first thing I started thinking about is I'm going to be without a full-time paycheck. And, to be 41 years old and facing that for the first time in a long, long time since my younger days, it was an eye-opener. And I talked to a number of veterans who faced that same thing. And they started thinking, shoot, I'm leaving. I'm giving up all this. I'm giving up my paycheck, and I'm moving on to another phase of my life, and that can be a little unsettling. But let me just kind of ease your mind here, and it's kind of the same way that I dealt with this when I made that decision. I started thinking, there are hundreds of thousands of veterans over the last decades that have either retired or left the military. And most of them all managed to survive, leave the military, go to school or get into other jobs, other careers, and become very successful. So the odds are in my favor, at least, if I do my part. So that may not sound like a sure thing, but it's something I think you can stop to think about is you are not doing this alone, and you're not doing it as an experiment. So many people have made that decision and took that step before you that they have become successful, and you can become successful too. So just keep that in mind. If you're thinking about making that decision, there is, as I say, life after the uniform. I'm very blessed, very fortunate. I retired from the Army 21, going on 22 years ago, and now I'm getting ready to retire from my second career for good, and I am going to spend the rest of my time doing things I enjoy instead of working. So trust me, it's there. You can do it. So keep that in mind. Now, the other thing that some of the people think about, and I had a unique experience in this, in that when I was still on active duty, it kind of fell to me. In fact, at the time that I had the opportunity to go back to school, a number of the instructors who worked for me, I ran one of the schools on Fort Benning, Georgia, and I had 6 instructors who worked for me. And the funny thing was, I had a requirement to come and work at my school because not many NCOs are in the military, sergeants, non-commissioned officers, have an opportunity to get an assignment where they can dedicate a lot of time going back to school. So when I first got that assignment, it was the first assignment like that I had had in my career in the first 11 years or 12 years I was in the military. So I made a conscious decision to go back and finish my undergraduate degree. And then when I finished that, I said, I'm not sure how much longer I'm going to be here. And I jumped right into my my master's degree in human resource management and crammed it in a year so I could try to finish it before I had to move again. So the running joke in our school was a lot of my instructors called me the professor, and they were required if they wanted to come down and work for me as an instructor. I told them, I'm not gonna bring you on as an instructor unless you're dedicated to going to school, because there are so many other NCOs that would come down here and teach if they had an opportunity to go to school. So I made them all go to school. So when it came time, I had several instructors while I was stationed there decide it was time that they wanted to leave the military. And of course, one of the first things they did was they came to talk to me about, Sergeant, can you help me with this? I need help making some preparations. And because my master's degree was in HR, they thought maybe I would have all the answers looking for jobs once they left the military. But there was one thing I could help them with, and that was a resume. And for those of you that, of course, are all working adults, so you know what that's like. You know what it's like to try and create that perfect resume, or not necessarily a perfect resume, but one where you really feel comfortable that you can sell yourself and sell yourself effectively, because quite frankly, that's what it is. And for those of you that were in the military and you had your records and a photo go before a promotion board or senior promotion board in the Army, you remember that 2-1 and 2 alpha form that was sent up to the Department of the Army along with your photo and your Class A, your dress uniform. That resume takes the place of that when you leave the military, and that's that document to sell you. So it becomes a very, very important piece of what you need to be prepared to do. Now, there's no best format. There's no set format, although I will tell you, and we'll talk about this later on at some point, but the federal government does have a format that they prefer when you apply for a job with the federal government. And I'll share some of that with you later on down the road as we go through some of this. But other than that, you can find all kinds of books on how to best prepare a resume, how to prepare yourself, what to put, what you shouldn't put. Again, like I said, there is no one answer to the entire question. So it depends on what you feel comfortable with. Maybe what field you're applying for may have some specific requirements, but whatever it is, there are a lot of resources out there that can help you. I will also share with you, we had several guests on my show in the past from a company called Dark Wolf Solutions. Evan De Silva was one of my guests from that company. And Dark Wolf is an organization that actually specializes in recruiting veterans and placement for veterans and helping with veterans transference of veterans moving from the military service and into the private sector. So making that transition, if you want to get on Google, and you can Google them, darkwolf.com, you'll find them on there. And they are one of the organizations that we have spoken to firsthand on a previous show. that are there to help you. So for those of you that are interested, take a look at it, give it a shot. You can give them a call and talk to them about what kind of assistance you can get. But as I said, there is no one set format for preparing a resume. Now, a couple of things just to keep in mind when you're looking at preparing a resume. First of all, some places are going to require you to have a cover letter. Some of them won't. It just depends. The cover letter it tends to have become passe in so many cases. The reason why is because so many HR offices and organizations get so many resumes for their positions. A lot of times they don't worry about a cover letter. And in fact, a lot of HR organizations will recommend that you keep your resume to no more than 2 pages. Some organizations will flat out tell you, the companies they work with, if you take more than 2 pages to tell them about yourself and your experiences, chances are they're going to put your resume aside. So something to keep in mind. Again, you may have some of those specialty careers, specialty companies that may want more information. If that's the case, you can probably find out from them. But I will tell you, in a general sense, 2 pages is normally about as long as they want. I still remember, even after I went to work in my current position with the government, I moved a number of times to new positions, and each time I had to apply, but I never let my resume get beyond 3 pages, and that was in the government format. And that's because I had held a number of government-related positions, and I always wanted to make sure that I could go far enough back to highlight my time in the military. So it just depends on what you have to put on your resume as to how long you're going to make it. But the guideline should be try to keep it short and simple. Now, one of the things that I always thought was interesting, and this still used to go on when I was a little bit younger, even while I was in the military back in the day, was a lot of people would fill out a resume, and some of the things they put on there were, that they're married, they have, 3 or 4 children. My hobbies are going hiking and fishing and all. And I can tell you that's pretty much, for the most part, going out the window. Some companies might include some of that type of information in an interview, just as a matter of getting to know you a little bit. But for the most part, first of all, asking a lot of that type of information is now against the law, or verboten, as we want to say. So companies steer away from that on the resume. So as you're looking at preparing your resume, don't worry about the personal information, whether you're married, whether you have kids, where you like to vacation. Save that for the interview if somebody happens to just ask you while in conversation. Okay. It's always, best to leave all of that information out. And as I said, keep it short. Keep it short. Keep it simple. The old acronym, keep it simple, stupid, KISS, that really applies here, folks, when we're talking about resumes. So for those of you thinking about transitioning out, kind of keep some of these simple things in mind that I've just been mentioning, because they can become important as you get ready to make that transition. All right, so we're going to just take a very short break, and we're going to hear from those 2 wonderful sponsors that I mentioned earlier in the show. And when we come back on the other end, we'll continue our discussion about taking that first step with a resume and how to address some of those things we need to address. All right, welcome back, everyone. And you are listening to the WGSN-DB Going Solo Veterans Corner with your host, retired Army First Sergeant Paul Holbert. And thank you for coming back with us after the break. And I just wanted to mention something, and hopefully I won't catch our studio head, CC, off guard, but I wanted to remind everyone, for those of you that would like to send me a message, or for those of you that would like to suggest a topic of presentation or discussion on the show, you can reach me, and I'll ask her to put my email address up on the screen, theliteraryvet@gmail.com. So hopefully I'll hear from some of you and you will send me some information. Tell me what you'd like to hear. Tell me what you'd like us to discuss. Tell us what information might be useful to you. So again, you can reach me at literaryvet@gmail.com, and we will put that up on the screen to make sure that everyone can see that. So please feel free. There it is. Thank you. There it is. And please feel free to reach out to me and give me your ideas and things that you might like to see or have us discuss on the show. All right, so we're going to continue on with tonight's discussion and talking about part 2 of that transition of life after the uniform. And I've been talking about that all vital document, the resume. And I have to tell you, and I think I mentioned this on the last show, I spent a lot of my time when I was doing this, when I was stationed at Fort Benning, Georgia. And for those of you that aren't aware, some of you, of course, will definitely remember Fort Benning. It's the infantry training center for the United States Army. So there's a lot of hard training that goes on there. And by virtue of that, when I say hard training, the Army Jump School is there. That's the parachutist school. The parachute rigger school, the guys that actually pack the parachutes. Jump Master School, the Ranger School, the Army Officer Candidate School, and that is the Infantry Training Center for the U.S. Army as well. So a lot of hard training goes on there. And as you can imagine, of course, to conduct that training, they need a lot of experienced instructors in those fields. So one of the things that I used to run into when I was stationed there is I would literally have soldiers from our unit who were in those various fields. You know, some of them were, infantrymen, other combat arms, things of that nature, where they had spent most of their career doing just that. And that's what they were doing. And they'd come and they'd talk to me and say, Paul, I'm not sure how I can equate what I've been doing in the Army to military service. Because quite frankly, a lot of the guys, when they were leaving the service, retiring, they were either too banged up or too old to get jobs as police officers and other things, but they still needed that second career. So that was kind of a challenge at times, trying to help some of my friends there who came to me for help. And I by no means was the end all to be all or had the answer to everything. So when I couldn't help them, I would definitely send them to one or two of the guys I knew at the transition center that they had there on post for some further guidance. But let me just share with you, in the military, you ladies and gentlemen, know what you did. Whether it was combat arms, whether you were working in a hospital, you worked in a motor pool, whatever you did, you had a particular skill. And even if you did something that didn't necessarily equate to a direct civilian career, I'll give you an example. When I first enlisted in the Army, I was what, almost 21 years old, just finished 2 years of school and decided to go in and I enlisted in my first enlistment. I enlisted in field artillery, which, from those of you should know, for most of you, it's those big artillery guns that fire and blow stuff up from miles away. And I still remember I got a piece of advice from an old artillery first sergeant when I was stationed at Fort Campbell in the 101st. We were standing out in the middle of the night in the freezing cold, because our artillery unit was moving in the middle of the night. So we had to have someone there at the new point to guide those guns and vehicles into where they were supposed to go because it was dark. And I'm standing out there with the first sergeant waiting on the rest of our battery to get there with all the trucks and guns. And I still remember my first sergeant looking at me and he says, Holbert, are you going to stay in the Army? And of course, at that time, I wasn't quite sure. And I looked at him and I said, I don't know, First Sergeant. I haven't decided yet. He said, well, let me give you a piece of advice. He said, if you do, get the hell out of this and get into something else. Because he said, it will kill you. And of course, he laughed, but his advice was well taken because he was trying to tell me, if you're going to stay, make a career, this is a hard, hard life. So I'm just giving you a piece of advice. Find something else that you think you might like. And I did. I took his advice and I changed jobs when I re-enlisted and then spent the remainder of my career in the Nuclear, Biological, and Chemical Warfare Corps of the Army, which was that in of itself very interesting. But if you're in those jobs, you try to think, how did what I do equate to me getting out and getting a job on the outside? Because quite frankly, they're not going to pay me really too many places to jump out of planes somewhere, to lead infantry patrols and assaults, drive tanks, do those types of things. And, what I try to tell my fellow soldiers is, remember, there are a lot of things you did that equate to skills on the outside. When you think of what the military prepares us to do, we organize, we run operations, we manage programs, we make critical decisions, and a lot of us are in positions of leadership, sometimes for more than hundreds of people. So you got to keep that in mind when you're looking at how do I address some of what I did in the resume. If I was a mechanic, how does that equate on the outside? Well, I had responsibility for keeping 36 vehicles combat ready and running at all time. And to do that, here's what I had to do. Here's the maintenance records I had to plan. Here's the maintenance records I had to fill out. So there are so many other things. And that's just one example to give you an idea. If you sit down and think about what you did in the military, trust me, you're going to be able to find out how to equate quite a bit of that, at least some of the tertiary skills, to what you can do on the outside, to what employers are looking for. And I think you will be able to do that. So if you're stuck, find some help, find one of those organizations like I mentioned earlier, or some of the books that will help you do that. There are a lot of organizations out there. Last week, I talked about the Job Hunters Toolkit on the VA website that's available to veterans and their families, a very good tool to help you out with something like that. Now, I want to cover something else here that tends to be a resume killer, and this can be at some point a bit humorous. But in the military, as you know, like with some other jobs, and we joke around about it in my current job with the government in general, but the military in particular, uses a lot of acronyms. So I got to tell you, folks, no one's going to know what you're talking about if you start putting your resume together and just throwing up a bunch of acronyms. You're going to have to be able to convert what you're using for those acronyms into common speak so that some civilian or some company or organization that's reviewing your resume knows what the heck you're talking about, quite frankly. So you really need to be prepared to do that. And we all know there are acronyms used all the time on TV, and some of them we know that kind of transfer over into civilian life. ASAP, everybody knows ASAP because you hear that all the time. Hey, we need that ASAP. And for those of you that remember that movie, The Predator, with Arnold Schwarzenegger, to translate that over into Arnold terms, what did he say in the movie? Do it now. So ASAP is Arnold's equivalent to do it now. Okay, we all know that. That's a pretty common acronym that people use. So we're there. I think there aren't too many civilians that don't know what MREs are. when you talk to a soldier about MREs, you're going to get a variety of love-hate relationship stories. Some of them really like them. Some of them really don't. But most civilians, because of the movies, because of the news, all kinds of deployment information, most civilians know what MREs are. Now, the thing that kind of got me about MREs was I have a grandson who's actually getting ready to finish high school, and the boy, I don't understand it, and neither does his father, because his father's an Army veteran. The boy likes MREs. So we're not sure where he got it from. He didn't get it from us, but he likes MREs. So most people know what MREs are. SOPs, I think most people know what SOPs are, standard operational procedures, or as a lot of places like to call them, standard processes. So, if you use an acronym like MREs, or you use, I wouldn't use ASAP in a resume, but there are just some standard acronyms that we use in the military that a lot of people are quite familiar with. However, let me share with you a few that could give the civilian-minded person a definite wrong indication of what you're talking about. Now, for those of you that are in the air defense artillery or artillery field, as I was when I was younger, you would be familiar with man pads. So what are man pads? Man portable air defense systems, man pads. However, if you were to put man pads on a resume going to a civilian company, they may think that you're talking about a version of underarm sweat shields for guys. So you can see how there's just doesn't seem to be any equivalent there. How about STEAL? STEAL. Well, STEAL is strategic transfer of equipment. But if you told someone on a civilian resume that you had a lot of experience in STEAL, what do you think you might be telling them? They may think that you're a klepto, or you've got a lot of experience as a thief. Now I realize these are designed to be humorous, but you can just kind of see where I'm going here with some of this, using some of these resumes. Now, here's one thing that's interesting. I always talk to my wife about. We have, when I look at our society today, I think we've kind of cheapened the word hero to an extent. When I was younger, and even when I was a kid, a hero was someone who was definitely worthy of much admiration. I've seen shows now where someone who was a victim of a crime and they just simply survived being robbed or something like that, they were referred to as a hero. I don't know that someone who was a victim of a crime like that and just survived by handing over their wallet, it can be classified as a hero. So when we look at the term hero, what does it usually mean to us? It usually means someone who has done something above and beyond selflessly to the benefit of others or someone else. Okay, so when we think of that, however, when we use hero in the military, we're talking about hazards of electronic radiation. That's the acronym HERO. So if you use HERO on your resume and talked about you did investigations into HERO or reports of HERO, we're not talking about the comic book variety that a civilian reading your resume may think. They're liable to think that you were investigating Marvel Comics or something of that nature. So again, I know these are kind of crazy examples, but they're designed to be that way to get your attention, to make you understand how important it can be to use the right. Now, here's one I thought that was really funny. Fonzie. Now, for those of you who hear Fonzie, I'm sure a lot of you are very familiar with Happy Days and Henry Winkler and the Fonz. However, when we use Fonzie in the military, we're talking about findings of no significant impact. That's Fonzie in the military. But when you talk to a civilian about Fonzie, they're liable to think you're striking up a conversation about Happy Days. So I know these are some crazy examples. They're a bit on the extreme side, but the idea is to get you thinking that when you put your resume together, Don't fill your resume with a bunch of military acronyms, because a lot of people, and especially in civilian organizations, are not going to understand what it is you're talking about or have any inkling of what you're trying to relay to them. So keep that in mind. It becomes very, very important. Now, one other thing really quickly about acronyms, and I will share with some of my veterans out there in the audience. We all know that we have the more extreme acronyms, and I will just share the acronyms, but not the meaning, just to keep it clean on the show, to give you guys a good laugh. And I think what most people know what CYA is. Okay, CYA, cover your butt, right? Only using the other word. So I think that is somewhat common. But then, of course, for those of you out there in the veteran persuasion, you remember FUBAR. You remember acronyms like BOHICA. So for those of you that aren't familiar with those, ask a veteran. I will let them share with you what those acronyms mean. And once you hear them, you'll probably realize and understand why I did not mention them specifically on the show. Okay, but as I said, folks, when you're out there preparing to make that transition, to work on that resume and start the next step of your career, of life after the uniform, you definitely want to make sure, I can't stress it enough, be careful of the acronyms, leave them out if they're not all important. And just like the rule for writing, the first time that you use an acronym, spell it out and identify what it's for or what it means. That way they can follow exactly what it is you are trying to say. Okay. And they used to always tell us, as a side joke, my career field, as I got into the later part of my career, we were referred to as an NBC specialist, nuclear, biological, and chemical warfare specialist. But if I told someone, and in fact I did one time, somebody asked me while I was in the Army, what do you do in the Army? And I didn't think about it, didn't think twice. I said, well, I'm an NBC specialist. And they said, oh, do you work for the TV network? Do you spend a lot of time, working with the TVs? And that's what really drove it home to me, that you have to make sure people understand exactly what it is you're getting at. So I will leave you with that. As I said, if you're looking at your resume, you're looking at how to start, there are a lot of books out there. There are a lot of organizations that can help you. You just have to select the one that you think is going to be of the most benefit to you. Okay. And I wish you luck on that endeavor. For those of you that may have some basic questions, you've seen my email address up on the screen, literaryvet@gmail.com. Thank you, CC. She's always on the ball. And you are more than welcome to drop me a note. And again, drop me a note if there's something you'd like us to see and cover and discuss on the show. We would much appreciate it. So before we close our show tonight, I wanted to take just a moment to encourage you. For those of you that have not visited the Disabled American Veterans website, I would encourage you to take a look at it. DAV.org, there it is, the Disabled American Veterans. I'm a lifetime member. You can join and assist them with a lot of programs. And folks, I encourage you, for those of you veterans who are out there, I encourage you to go to the website and join, because they do so many things, not only for you, but your fellow veterans, and for disabled veterans in particular. There are all kinds of programs. There are all kinds of information they put out. There's fundraising they do for veterans programs. They're a terrific organization. So I really, really encourage you to go to DAV.org, take a look at what they have to offer. And if you're not a member, veterans, join and help them out with their mission, because it's a worthwhile mission. All right, I'd like to thank you tonight for joining us on the WGSN-DB Going Solo Veterans Corner, and we are part of the GoingSoloMedia.com network. We encourage you to visit our website. You will find my page on the GoingSoloMedia.com network as well, with all my past shows. And again, we hope to see you on the next show. And for those of you who are out there, drop me a line and share some thoughts with me. Thank you and good night.